Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's happening in the Russian economy. And of course, the biggest thing affecting the Russian economy right now is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And President Putin has come out and warned the West once again against getting involved in Ukraine, even though they're technically already involved in terms of all of the financial support that's being provided. But he's come out and reset his red line. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, what is his red line? I've never actually heard of President Putin's red line before. Now, this is something that he actually introduced to the world back in April 2021 as part of his annual address to the nation. And this was actually 10 months before the invasion of Ukraine started. And this is what he said at that conference.
I hope no one will cross Russia's red line. But in each case, we are the ones who will decide where the red line is. Organisers of any provocation threatening our security will regret it, like they haven't regretted anything for a long time.
So I'm not sure about you, but I'm not really sure what the red line is, because all he said in that statement was that Russia will decide where the red line is, and if anybody crosses it, then they're going to regret it. But immediately following the invasion of Ukraine, President Putin gave a speech on national TV where he actually gave us some more details as to what he considers the red line to be.
В своей агрессивной антироссийской политике Запад перешел всякую грань. Мы постоянно слышим угрозы в адрес нашей страны, нашего народа. Некоторые безответственные политики на Западе не только говорят о планах по организации поставок в Украине дальнобойных наступательных вооружений. Тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России, хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф.
So in that speech, President Putin has made specific reference to long-range weapons. And this is now a really hot topic because President Zelensky has actually requested to both the USA, the UK and the rest of the Western alliance that it can use its long-range weapons to start striking Russia. And this isn't just defending itself. This isn't Ukraine taking down missiles that Russia is sending into Ukraine. Ukraine actually wants to start hitting different targets within Russia. These might be missile sites or potentially even refineries and other form of infrastructure to hurt Russia in its pocket to try to get it to come around the table and agree some form of peace settlement. But obviously, Russia is very concerned about the ability to be able to strike deep into Russian territory. And so President Putin has made it very clear that this would definitely be crossing the red line. And this statement was recently released on Russian TV.
The updated version of the document proposes that aggression against Russia by any non-nuclear weapon state, but with the participation or support of a nuclear weapon state, should be regarded as a joint attack on the Russian Federation. The conditions for Russia's transition to the use of nuclear weapons are also clearly defined. We will consider such a possibility as soon as we receive reliable information about a massive launch of aerospace attack means and their crossing of our state border, meaning strategic or tactical aircraft, cruise missiles, drones, hypersonic missiles, and other aircraft. We reserve the right to use nuclear weapons in the event of aggression against Russia and Belarus as a member of the Union State. All these issues have been agreed upon with the Belarusian side and with the president of Belarus. This includes cases when the enemy, using conventional weapons, poses a critical threat to our sovereignty.
So Russia has now officially redrawn the red line and given a warning to the West that if it allows Ukraine to use its long-range missiles, then that will technically be bringing all of those nations into the war in Ukraine and that Russia will respond accordingly. Now, the reason why President Putin has announced this at this point is that President Zelensky is currently on a tour of the USA, and he's taken what he's calling his victory plan to President Biden and has presented it to him. And nobody knows the details of what's in that victory plan, but it's likely that Ukraine is requesting the ability to use long-range missiles to do whatever it likes with, so basically be able to send them deep into Russia. Now, as I said in a recent video, I don't think that Joe Biden, coming into the last quarter of his presidency, is likely to agree to anything that could potentially trigger some form of World War III. I think that would be quite surprising if he suddenly says to Ukraine, yes, go ahead and use our long-range missiles. So realistically, this decision is going to be taken either by Kamala Harris if she wins the presidency, or Donald Trump. Now, obviously, Kamala Harris is currently the Vice President of the United States, and so she's actually been meeting with President Zelensky as part of his tour. So let's hear directly from her as to what she's got to say on this matter.
I've been proud to stand with Ukraine. I will continue to stand with Ukraine, and I will work to ensure Ukraine prevails in this war. The Ukrainian people are bravely defending their homes and their homeland, their freedom and their democracy against a brutal dictator. Putin's aggression is not only an attack on the people of Ukraine, it is also an attack on fundamental principles such as sovereignty and territorial integrity. History has shown us if we allow aggressors like Putin to take land with impunity, they keep going, and Putin could set his sights on Poland, the Baltic states, and other NATO allies. We also know that other would-be aggressors around the world are watching to see what happens in Ukraine. If Putin is allowed to win, they will become emboldened. And history reminds us, and history is so clear in reminding us, the United States cannot and should not isolate ourselves from the rest of the world. Isolation is not insulation. So then, the United States supports Ukraine not out of charity, but because it is in our strategic interest. We will continue to provide the security assistance Ukraine needs to succeed on the battlefield, as demonstrated by President Biden's significant announcement earlier today. President Zelensky, I am clear. Putin started this war, and he could end it tomorrow if he simply withdrew his troops from Ukraine's sovereign territory. Of course, he has demonstrated no intention of doing that. Instead, he continues to assault civilian infrastructure and terrorize the people of Ukraine. There are some in my country who would instead force Ukraine to give up large parts of its sovereign territory, who would demand that Ukraine accept neutrality and would require Ukraine to forego security relationships with other nations. These proposals are the same of those of Putin. And let us be clear, they are not proposals for peace. Instead, they are proposals for surrender, which is dangerous and unacceptable.
Now, in terms of a reference towards the end of that speech about the surrender of Ukrainian territory if the war is brought to a rapid conclusion, this is clearly aimed at Donald Trump, who's come out recently and said that he can end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours. And obviously, the only way, realistically, that you'd be able to bring a conclusion to this war within one day would be to agree to what President Putin is demanding. And so Kamala Harris is saying that there are no circumstances that she would agree to that proposal, and therefore, if she's elected as president, it's likely that the USA's support for Ukraine will continue over the course of her presidency, so the next 4 or 5 years, and therefore we're likely to see this war continuing because, as it stands at the moment, there doesn't look like there's any peaceful end in sight unless one or the other of the two sides agrees to some form of settlement. And Ukraine is saying that it wants all of its territory back. And Russia is saying that all of that territory is now officially part of Russia. That's the reason why President Putin said he invaded Ukraine, because he believed that the people in those regions were predominantly Russians and that they were being terrorized by the Ukrainian authorities. So we've got a standoff that's very difficult to settle. And I think what we're seeing here is a real turning point in the war in Ukraine. And it's all going to hinge on what happens in the US presidential election. If Kamala Harris is successful, then clearly she's going to continue with the same policies that Joe Biden had. So there will be long-term support for Ukraine. So that means that they'll be able to get lots of military support and equipment and continue in their defense. However, if Donald Trump is successful, there is a question mark as to what will happen, whether or not he will continue with the support package that's been provided, or if he's thinking about ending the war in 24 hours, if he wants to sit down around the table with President Putin of Russia and Zelensky and come up with some form of agreement, some form of settlement that both sides are prepared to agree to. Now, clearly, as it stands at the moment, President Zelensky of Ukraine would be unlikely to agree to that settlement. So let's hear what he had to say on the matter during his recent meeting.
Today we have a new strong support package, as you said, and we have common view on the things that need to be done. We have to keep pressure on Russia to stop the war and to make truly lasting and just peace. It's a top priority for us and for other freedom-loving nations to achieve not a freezing, but real peace for us. So we need to keep sanctions against Russia strong, and we need to use the proceeds from immobilized Russian assets to protect Ukraine, our people, our cities, our front line from Russian evil. And of course, we must work hard to bring all Russian war criminals to justice. And one more thing, I want to inform Madam Vice President about the latest Russian missile and Shahid's attacks against Ukrainian energy infrastructure. We need to urgently strengthen Ukraine's air defense to save thousands of lives and reduce Russian terror to zero. It's achievable.
So he made a number of really interesting points there. Firstly, he was talking about freedom and the ability to defend yourself. So it's likely that Ukraine will resist any form of peace settlement that involves handing over a large part of their territory. Secondly, he referred to the Russian sanctions and said that they need to remain strong. And clearly, the sanctions are the biggest reason why the Russian economy is struggling so much at the moment, because Russia is struggling to be able to sell all of its goods, and also it can't import all of the things that it wants to. He also referred to the bond package that's being put together at the moment using frozen Russian assets. And then finally, he made reference to air defense. He's talking about the ability to use those long-range missiles. And I think this is going to form part of his victory plan that he's putting to President Biden. As I said, I don't think Joe Biden is going to sign off on that. And I think what's more likely is that plan will be represented to the new president of the USA in January 2025. And it will be really interesting to see what either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump say in response to that plan. And that is going to be the turning point in this war in Ukraine. If Kamala Harris is voted in as president, I think we will see a continuation of the situation that we've got now with the disruption to the global economy. However, if Donald Trump is voted in, it will be really interesting to see what his proposal is to end that war in 24 hours. What Ukraine's response to that is, then what the response is from Europe and the other allies if it isn't carrying on with the position as it is right now. And we could see a really big shift in what's going on in both the war in Ukraine and Europe and the Russian economy if Donald Trump is successful and is voted in as president in 2025. So the overall summary of today's video is that President Putin has once again been rattling his sabers. He's been threatening the West with some form of nuclear action in the event of crossing his new red line, and he's set a new boundary. That boundary appears to be the approval of the use of long-range missiles. If the West does approve it, then Russia is saying you will need to deal with the consequences. We will do what we need to do to protect Russia. So there is a direct inference that nuclear weapons could be on the table. However, I think realistically what President Putin is doing right now is telling the USA not to approve the use of long-range missiles as part of President Zelensky's visit. I don't think Joe Biden wants to approve them anyway in the last few months of his presidency. So it's likely that this issue will remain on the table until the start of 2025. And the new president of the USA is going to have to make a call as to whether or not Ukraine can use those long-range missiles. If Ukraine is allowed to use those weapons, then clearly that could change the face of this war in terms of what Russia is saying. However, if the new president says that there is never a chance of using those long-range missiles, then clearly this issue will be put to bed. And I'll keep you posted on any news as and when it comes through. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's slightly different version of my videos. Hopefully you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.
Maybe lying about, not that you'd tell me if you were lying.
I'm not figuring you from jealousy.
Oh, I'm not.
Sabrina.
Talk to Prudence. Flirt with Prudence. Flirt with all the weird sisters, or the entire academy, which you do. By the way, witches and warlocks alike, you're an equal opportunity flirt. And that's mine, Nick. But I'm going home. Oh, and sorry, but I don't think I can be your magician's assistant. Be an arm candy?